Welcome to the Tennis Equipment Masterclass Part 1 with special guest Harry Tong on episode 265 of the Tennis Files podcast. Hello and welcome to another episode of the show. This is mehrban, your host, and it's always a pleasure to have you listening. And if this is your first time, welcome. And today we have guest Harry Tong, who is the creator of the Tennis Spin YouTube channel, which I've been enjoying a lot. It's really impressive. Harry uploads videos pretty much every single day on his YouTube channel about rackets, equipment, and how to improve your game, and many other topics. And it's really cool because he is the shop manager of Brad Gilbert's Tennis Nation, which is a tennis shop in California. And so you see Harry making videos with all the beautiful tennis gear, rackets, string, shoes, etc. And he's just a really fun and down-to-earth person who has a deep affinity for tennis equipment and gear. So on the show, we'll cover topics such as the right rackets for you, the new technologies in rackets and what they actually mean in practical terms, how Harry became Brad Gilbert's store manager. Brad Gilbert is definitely one of the tennis legends out there. I believe he was top 4 in the on the ATP tour, and of course coached Andre Agassi, and is the author of a great book called Winning Ugly. We also talk about specific rackets. I ask him about my racket preferences as well, and strings. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, this is just part 1. So we spoke for about 2 hours, and I decided to break down the episode into 2 parts for you for your listening pleasure. So without further ado, here is part 1 of my interview with Harry Tong from Tennis Spin. Hey everybody, I am here with Harry Tong. Harry, it's really a pleasure to have you on the podcast. I've really been enjoying your videos on your Tennis Spin YouTube channel, and you do a great job at Brad Gilbert's Tennis Nation shop. So just great to finally see you or talk to you directly, even though it's via the internet. Hopefully I'll see you in physical form one day, but how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Mehrban. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh, of course. Yeah, no, it's I mean, you've done such a great job. Like I said, your YouTube channel is really blown up. And I think it's just due to how, affable you are and knowledgeable you are and just down to earth. So really enjoying what you're doing. But I guess I want to start, with your background, because it's very interesting to see how all the people in tennis get started in the game. So where would you say your start with respect to tennis came from?
So that's an interesting question. It's actually in my kind of bio online, and that bio is actually true. I want to say 6 years old, and I remember watching on television John McEnroe and Jimmy Connors playing Wimbledon on a black and white screen in like the late 70s. And I was like, I need a tennis racket. So I dragged my dad down to the local Walgreens. That's when Walgreens had tennis rackets. And the only one they had, and I didn't know really what it was a Chris Everett Woody Special. Like a it said Chris Everett on the racket by Wilson. And I was like, Dad, I want this. And so I think it was like $8 or $10 for that wooden tennis racket. And he bought it for me. From then on, I mean, all I did was like hit against the wall with it, because I didn't really know what I was doing. I didn't have, people to play with at age 6. So that's all I did was just beat against the wall with that wooden racket. And that's kind of how my passion got started.
What do you think it was about the magic of tennis? Because I mean, I presume you might have seen like other sports maybe on TV or in physical form as well. So what do you think it was about tennis that got you hooked?
I mean, I think a lot of it has to do with the formalities of it. It's judged by scoring, by people, ins and outs were called by somebody. Um, People back then tend to be more, I don't want to say politically correct, but definitely like more of a formality. You followed certain things. I mean, McEnroe was
Yeah.
probably the first one that we all know of that, like lashed out and used
Yeah.
his emotions to fire himself up. For me as a 6-year-old, that was a little unique to me, but a little different to the game. But I think it brought people into the game that continued with it. So, but it was like you're wearing white at Wimbledon, you're wearing collars, and I just thought that was like the coolest thing. So, and from then on, I was like, Wimbledon was like the beast of all tournaments that everybody watch and still watches today. And I look forward to that tournament every year. So Wimbledon, along with Connors and McEnroe, and even like Chris Everett and Martina. I love watching the gracefulness of the game back then. Just the way it was played.
Yeah, yeah, it's always interesting how we, how much we cherish the memories as a kid, and then we kind of like look forward to them like somewhat replicating in some form or fashion later on. So yeah, I definitely hear you with that. And then in terms of like your tennis career, I mean, did you, play like competitively, or were you more like, I love the game, but it was more like a casual thing, or how did that go?
So back when I played, it wasn't as competitive. I mean, you would really have to find tournaments, and they were pretty obscure. So, I mean, I played high school tennis. I played a year at JC. I wasn't very good, but I mean, I managed to, kind of squeak a year out. But, my love of the game kind of just kept me going. I was kind of one of those equipment junkies. I
Mm,
really wanted to work at a tennis shop and string rackets, which I did, when I got into college. And I was a collector. I loved rackets. I mean, I still have a lot of rackets from back then because I just collect. I don't get rid of. So I've got a great collection of wood, steel, combinations. I mean, you name it, I probably have one somewhere. Um, yeah, I got room in it. My buddy who retired a couple years ago, yeah, he was a real collector. He 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 worked for Caltrain, which is like the roadwork people out here in the Bay Area. And
mm.
wherever he would have a job, he would walk into like a Goodwill or one of those thrift stores and literally walk into the club and say, "Hey, look what I got." And I'm like, "Oh my gosh." And then he's like, "I got it for $1." And I'm like, "Oh, great." And then
Quality.
yeah, he went to but I mean some of the stuff he got, they were pro staffs, they were Prince
Oh,
graphites, they were
that's amazing.
I
Wow.
mean it's like some of the stuff he got, it's just people just tossed them out, donated them, and then they don't know what they had, so they threw it out for $1 or two.
Dang.
He went to like a retirement community a few years back, and he said, "Hey, do you want my rackets?" And I'm like, "Sure." And then he goes, "Bring the car over." And I brought the car over. There was literally like 1,000 rackets in his garage, just like lined up. So I literally made like 5, 6 trips over there. So, I mean, a lot of it were wooden old time rackets that I had to kind of get rid of, but there were a lot of gems in there too. But that's kind of how I started my career in kind of knowing what rackets are, what they can
Mhm.
do, how they benefit certain people. So
Mm.
so I've always been kind of a student of like rackets technology. Who's it for? Why is it for this person? How would it make somebody better?
Yeah, and I definitely am gonna poke more into that because I think you'll be able to help a lot of the viewers with selecting rackets. I'm curious, so of all those, all the rackets you've handled, like, do you have like a one favorite or a couple of them that are just magical for you?
Oh man, that's hard to decide. I mean,
Thousands of rackets.
the one racket that's magic for me, well, there's three of them, but the one The one racket that I always try to seek is a Yamaha. Uh, I
Oh,
mean, we all know Yamahas for like pianos and possibly motorcycles,
bikes,
but
yeah.
they did make tennis rackets, and they were very successful at it in the late 80s to early 90s. If you know a person by the name of Yannick Noah or
Mm-hmm.
Gabriella Sabatini,
Mm-hmm.
they were kind of the faces of that brand. And the Yamaha Secret 4 is one of my favorite rackets out there. It's one of those magic rackets, as I call it. It's 100 square inches, super stiff. It's got an RA of 80. So when that puppy hits that ball, it's going. But that was like during the time of wide bodies. So it was when thick rackets were in, power was in. And but yeah, I tell everybody, if you see one of those guys somewhere, garage sale, whatever, you buy that racket. It's magic.
Wow. So would you equate that to some sort of like even stiffer somehow Babolat or something? Or like what
Oh
modern
my
racket would
God.
you?
Oh my God. There's nothing that compares to that these days.
Oh, really?
I mean, Jesus. I mean, the only thing that would compare would be one of those kind of super light big rackets, like a TIS 6 or a TIS 5 would be kind of the closest thing. The Yamaha was like a 12-ounce racket, though. These TISs are like 8.8 to 9-ounce rackets. So it's kind of in the ballpark in terms of stiffness, but not in terms of control.
Hmm. So how do you think the pros, Sabatini and Noah, were playing with that type of racket? That it sounds like it has like a super amount of power in it.
Yeah, back in that day, we still strung our rackets back at 65 pounds to 70
Mm.
pounds, maybe upwards of about 75 pounds to keep the ball in play. But yeah, that's the only way you could control it. I mean, my friends and I who had that racket, like 65 was pretty normal with like Prince top spin or Prince synthetic gut. Um, Poly wasn't really a player back then, so it was either gut or a synthetic, and that's how you would keep it in, just by super tight strings.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because I used to play with the Hammer 6.2, the skunk that
Oh yeah.
Todd Martin played with. Yeah, but at that time I was stringing in like the low 60s or maybe even mid 60s.
Mm-hmm.
But now I'm like closer to 50, so it's definitely gone down quite a bit using poly as well though. And then as far as your transition then to Brad Gilbert's Tennis Nation store, like how did that come about? Because that's so cool that you're associated with. And I was actually listening to a podcast interview that he did with you as well on his podcast. So like, how did that relationship happen?
So it was a very interesting relationship. I was literally in a retail store, Lombardi Sports in the city, for about 9 years. And I worked there throughout my college career, which spanned all of 7.5 years. So it took me 7.5 years to graduate out of college. I didn't really want to go
Triple
to school.
major? Just kidding.
I did change majors. I couldn't pass
Okay.
finance or computer science, so I switched to political science, and
That's
3 papers, no finals.
Yeah, I graduated in that too. So yeah, good major.
Good. You know how it is. Just write your way through your degree.
Just write some words. You're good.
Exactly. You BS your way through it pretty much.
That's right. That's
and
a
then
degree.
so when I graduated, my first job was at a tennis club in which I worked at for about a year and a half. And then I went on to other things, but I've always worked in the tennis industry on weekends, even though I had full-time jobs. And one of Brad's best friends, his name was Devin. He inherited me when he became a GM of one of the clubs. And so Brad approached Devin and said, "What do you think about opening up a shop like back in the day when we were in Piedmont in Oakland, where they would hang out?" Right. And then so Devin, the partner, came to me and said, "What do you think about opening up a retail store in Marin?" I was like, "You're out of your mind. Don't bother doing that." Excuse me. I was like, "You're going to lose your shirt. No one's going to come. That's a thing of the past." why would you even think about doing that? Obviously, they didn't listen, and they decided to go ahead and do it anyways. And I wasn't part of it. They just asked me if they should. They brought in a third partner for the first year and a half. They ran the store and they ran it very successfully. They were actually very surprised at how many people actually went to the store pretty much off the bat. Back then, there was a little more competition. There were like 2, 3 other places that kind of did the same thing. But obviously, with Brad's name, there's a draw there,
Oh
right?
yeah.
So, so they were pretty successful from the start. And the third partner that actually managed the store they kind of had a little falling out. And I said I'd help you out a little bit for about a year, and then something happened to me where my full-time job got like relocated, let's say. So they closed our division in San Francisco and moved it all to New York. And I wasn't going to move to New York. So I did it part-time, and then they finally kind of said, well, we kind of need somebody full-time. Would you be up to doing this? And I'm like, sure, and so it's, how many years has it been now? It's been 15 years since I said yes. So I split my time, though. I split my time between there and at the tennis club. So my 2 part-time jobs became my 2 full-time jobs. So I do put in, 6 days a week between the 2 places. And I've only recently started taking Mondays off. Like, I was working literally 7 days a week for like 12 years.
Wow.
So, yeah.
That is rough. That is rough. So what's your split like between the shop and the club? Is it like 50-50, or is it?
The club, I put in about 40 hours. The shop, I put in about 30 to 35 hours. So it's a long day. I mean, I get in at like 8 to 8:30 in the morning, and then I get out of the club at about 9:30 at night. So it's a good 13-hour day for me.
Wow. So yeah, I mean, that's a lot. You're working 2 full-time jobs, and then also, I mean, I guess I got to sneak this in. I wanted to ask about it a little later, but I mean, how do you manage with the YouTube channel, man? I mean, how do you fit that all in?
Well, it's tough. It's tougher now. I mean, when pandemic hit, I had a lot of free time, and that's how we pretty much got started, because of all that free time. But right when I get in at 8:30, I kind of have a list of what I would like to talk about and some subjects that I wanted to do. So we literally shoot for an hour to an hour and a half in the morning, like the store stuff, when I'm, standing at the store and talking about various subjects and topics. The on-court time usually happens after hours. So when we hit, it's usually when everybody's gone, or I take it to like a local court, like my buddy Coach Rob has a court, or we do it at the club, or we do it at a different club, and that's like after hours when everybody's gone. So it's tough. We kind of work on the outer fringes of, before we open, and then kind of after we close. Sometimes we'll do it in the middle if it's a slow day, but most of the time we either early or late, depending on what we're doing. But yeah, no, it's tough. It's tough. I mean, I want to do it every day just because I'm on a roll, and it's been, I think in the last 2.5 years, I might have missed 2 days. I might have missed 2 days of posting on YouTube.
Wow, so. That is really, really impressive. Yeah, sometimes people tell me, wow, you got a full-time job and you're doing this online tennis stuff, but you have 2 full-time jobs and you're doing it. So well done.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. So question about rackets. So I definitely want to procure your knowledge, if that's the right word. So first of all, like, what do you think are some of the biggest mistakes that players make when they want to get a new racket that's for their game, but they end up just taking the wrong approach?
So the one thing that I see where I am is that everybody wants to kind of be like everybody else. They, our number one seller is like a Pure Drive or a Clash or an Arrow. And
Yeah.
I mean, obviously they're super sexy. Their friends have it and they kind of want to be like their friends. It's like keeping up with the Kardashians. It's like keeping up with the Pure Drive, keeping up with the Pure Arrow.
Right.
I mean, it's like, okay, if you want it, that's fine. I mean, those three rackets are great all around rackets, but there's so much more out there. I mean,
Yeah.
everybody makes a Pure Drive type of a racket. Everybody makes an Arrow type of a racket. Clash is kind of very unique. And I feel like 80% of the people can definitely get away with that and understand the racket. 20% of people, not going to understand, not going to like it. But there's so many more options out there than those three. So like, don't choose it because your friends have it. Make sure you get something that fits you.
Yeah, that's a great piece of advice. I mean, I guess a lot of people also kind of go based on like what looks cool and all that. So
Definitely.
Yeah.
Going back to that topic, I actually did a video on that says, I tell people, look on the wall. Which one looks the best to you? And they always gravitate towards the white racket, a Strike, a Solinco whiteout, or a Technofiber, right? It's the white just pops off the wall. And then women I have to get this white racket. I don't care how I play with it. It's my racket, right? Because it looks good in my bag and I look good holding it. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. And I did a whole video on that. And a couple women were like, how dare you? Our team, we demoed rackets and we chose it based on how well we play with it. And I'm like, you know what? I respect that. And I wish everybody was like you. But unfortunately, where I am, it's all about aesthetics. So I'm just telling you what I have to deal with on a daily basis.
Yeah. 100%. And then, as far as I guess kind of the opposite question, so putting yourself in let's say like amateur club level player's shoes, like a 3.5, 4.0, somewhere around there, like what would be your most efficient approach to finding a racket that's good for you?
I think that most people really should, depending on their age, really should demo some rackets. Probably start with the 100 square inch standard versions of every racket, and then see how you do with those first. If it's not enough power, definitely go a little bigger and lighter. If it's too much power, go a little smaller. But I think those 3.5s usually, the one mistake that I tell people is don't buy a racket that feels good right now, because it only feels good now. Ask the person who knows what will be good for you later. Like if you're like 25 or 30 years old and you're a 3.5 player, you may not want a Pure Drive 107. You may not even want a Pure Drive. You should probably get something like a Blade, because you're going to grow out of that power and develop a stroke easier with a Blade. It's more flexible. You'll actually be forced to swing. You'll develop a better stroke. You'll have better technique. So that's the one advice that I tell people, like look down the road. Don't look at it right now.
Yeah, that's a great piece of advice. I know a lot of players, and I think I've done this as well, is like they'll try to find a racket, like if they want to switch, they'll start with finding a racket that has the exact same specs. So is that a valid approach, or is that still kind of like iffy?
That's very iffy, man.
Okay.
You wouldn't. I'm guilty of that myself. I used to read that, flip through the tennis magazines, and oh, there's a new racket out. Oh my gosh, it's exactly my spec. I have to buy this racket.
Yes.
I literally buy the racket and I go hit with it, and it's so muted. Like I can't feel a damn thing. Right? But the specs are perfect, right? But there's no feel when I hit the ball. So don't fall into that trap, because unless you try it, you really don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And then how much can you, it's really tough because, I mean, you got the racket part, but then you got the strings part. And so, I don't know. I'm trying to formulate the proper question, but like, how do you reconcile both? You know, like, I mean, like, what if you find a frame you really like? Are there some times where like, oh, like my this doesn't play well with my normal string, but maybe I'll just put some other string in it and it'll play well. Like, do you ever do stuff like that?
Oh, totally, totally. So
Okay.
certain rackets play well with certain strings.
Hmm.
I feel like certain rackets that are muted, you got to put a lively, louder string in. And in
Mm,
my opinion, a poly would probably work on a thinner poly would work the best because you'll
mm,
feel it when the ball hits that string, you'll feel it vibrating more. You'll feel it snapping
mm,
more, right? And that's what you kind of need. On a louder racket that's more hollow, you probably want to quiet it down a little bit. Hybrid would probably work the best in there because that synthetic will quiet that poly down so that it doesn't ring so much. So it's like I'm one of those people who feel is one of the most important things. I mean, I
yeah.
string my rackets at 48 pounds just because I want
Mm,
to feel the ball hit the strings and I want to feel it release. I want to hear what happens. I want to hear that pop noise when it releases. So and I know if I don't hear it, I'm off. You know, when I don't feel it, I'm off. So and I don't use a dampener, but it's all about feel for me.
got it. Got it. So I guess maybe let's give a concrete example. So pure arrow, can you classify for me like what type of racket it is for you, and then what type of string would you say works best? Is that like a lively string or a quiet string?
Okay, so we all know who Nadal is, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It's kind of
What?
built for that kind of player. It's kind of, that
Uh,
racket is built for that kind of player. In the years that racket's been out, I mean, literally 16, 17 years, um, I've sold it a lot to kids. I mean, kids love Nadal, kids love that racket. The
yeah,
colors are, obviously great.
solid. Yeah.
Um, it suits that 13, 14, 15, 16-year-old kid that hits with that massive spin. And it actually works super well with poly. Like a straight poly works very well with it. And that racket wants to go up. It wants to go north. It like trying to flatten that racket out is super difficult. Some of the people that were a little older in their 30s and 40s who bought that racket wanting to be Nadal, they're like, I literally can't hit the line. I can't hit down the line. I'm like 2 feet off. Like, because
Uh,
it wants to go north. You have to spin it to come in. You can't flatten it out. It's almost impossible. So they literally
yeah.
have to add lead to the top of the head and and
Uh,
and force the racket to come through straight versus going up. So it's that racket poly for more massive spin. So Rafa's combo is the combo to get for that one.
got it. Got it. And do you think that because I know there's players who like they put a lot of like lead and all that on their rackets, and then like I don't know, is there ever a point where like at that point you should just buy like a different racket? I mean, I don't know.
Since you've already made that investment, you might as well mess with it until
Yeah.
you can't go any further, and then maybe make another investment.
Yeah.
I
Makes sense.
feel like for myself, like I've gone through this one racket that Wilson made. It was called a Hyper Hammer 4.4 95
Mm.
square inch head that was around about 25 years ago. I was transitioning into different rackets, and that for some reason that was around, and I was just playing with it. It's like I said, 10 ounces without strings. So I literally started just adding lead to it, adding lead to it. And I was like addicted to adding lead to this racket.
You're a lead addict.
Finally, my final product a year later, like it was a head full of lead, like literally, like you couldn't
Hmm.
find a space that didn't have lead on it. Um, Racket weighed 13.3 when I was all said and done. And
33% more.
exactly. So it was like, it was
Damn.
basically a lead racket, but I couldn't recreate that hollow feel with another racket. I
Mm.
literally, for 14 years, searched for something else that would feel like that. and I couldn't do it. So what I did was I just bought them from, wherever I can find them for $50, $60, whatever I could get, and just let it all out because I couldn't recreate what I had. So I think that's what most people are kind of yearning for. They want what they have in terms of feel, but if buying a new racket, probably not going to solve that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, Harry. So how about since we're on the subject, like what's like one tip, one or two that you can give regarding like modifying a racket with lead tape or anything else?
So you kind of have to see what you need. Like I ask people, like, do you want more spin? Do you want more plow through? Are you trying to flatten it out? The typical person will add lead at 3 and 9 o'clock, right? Just because they want more plow through. Or if they're missing something on the serve, you put it at 12 o'clock for more snap down. When I was growing up, it was 3, 9, and 12 because you wanted that racket to be stable through the strike zone. So that's very, very, very typical even to today. People are now doing more counterbalancing, like the pros. They would go 12 o'clock and then go like down at the handle to kind of even it out a little bit, even out the weight distribution. If you want more spin, we're probably going to put it lower in the racket. If you want more plow, you put it at the top end of the racket. So it just depends on your swing and what you're kind of looking for.
Yeah, I appreciate that advice. Yeah, because I remember trying to experimenting with it, and I use a Pure Aero VS, the 2017 version, not the new one. All right, I really hope that you enjoyed part 1 of my interview with Harry Tong from Tennis Spin. And as always, the links that we mentioned on the show today are in the show notes page. And you can also go to tennisfiles.com/podcast and check out the episode there, or of course, tennisfiles.com/265. Sometimes that last link may not immediately be available if you listen in on Wednesday morning, but nevertheless, it will be live pretty shortly. And yeah, you can always find the links in your podcast app, of course. So there you go. And really appreciate you listening. And if you enjoyed this episode and you enjoy the podcast, I would really highly, highly appreciate it if you would leave a review for the Tennis Files podcast if you haven't yet. And you can do that at tennisfiles.com/Apple Podcasts with an S on the end, or in your favorite podcast app of choice that you use to listen to the show. I just find that leaving a review on Apple Podcasts is the biggest mover of the show in terms of getting it higher up the rankings and consequently getting more eyes on the show, which will help benefit all tennis players. So yeah, there you go. Really appreciate that. And also would like to leave you with a quote at the end of this show, as I do pretty much after every single episode. And this one is by Andrea Dijkstra. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Could be Dijkstra or Dijkstra. And Andrea said, "In order to love who you are, you cannot hate the experiences that shaped you." Very powerful quote there. And with that, I look forward to bringing you part 2 of my interview with Harry Tong. And Harry, again, thanks so much for coming on the show. And with that, I will see you all on the next episode of the Tennis Files podcast. This is your host, mehrban signing out.